Hi everybody, we have made it to our final unit and I have been waiting all semester to get to this particular part of our delve into British literature for a couple of reasons. One, I absolutely adore Jane Austen. I love all of her works, and another reason is because I this is the novel in late 18th century, early 19th century British literature is my, I don't want to say field of expertise because I'm not an academic scholar in any kind of sense of the way, but a majority of my graduate work focused on the novel and Gothic literature in particular. So this stuff is my kind of bread and butter. So I'm really excited to introduce you guys to Jane Austen and the Gothic genre and the 18th century, 19th century novel. And I know that our I chose to end our unit with this particular novel and with this particular focus of study because it really kind of sums up everything that we have discussed this semester in terms of the evolution of British literature, the various themes and various concerns and topics that we've discussed all semester long. And it really shows a kind of context of where we are not only in the 18th century and literarily speaking, but it also kind of shows you guys or gives you a glimpse into where British literature is headed with the Romantic movement and the kind of evolution of popular literary genre form, because the 19th century is, especially like with the Victorian period, is where we get some of our greatest novels in general. And if it weren't for someone like Jane Austen, we wouldn't really have a lot of the literature that we have today in terms of canonically speaking. So I do want to give a little forewarning. I am trying so hard to restrain myself from going too much into detail and being too long-winded with my kind of lectures and things this week. So bear with me. I do want to mention really quickly, I've also been waiting all semester long to use my Jane Austen um, handwriting font. So you'll see my Jane Austen handwriting font all throughout this unit. So I want to begin first by talking a little bit about the genre of the novel. And we talked a little bit about this in when I was laying the framework and groundwork, historical context for the 18th century and the kind of rise of the middle class, which we'll talk more about in just a second. We also talked a little bit about the novel as a genre when we were talking about Daniel Defoe and Roxana last week. So the novel as a genre becomes this kind of worldwide cultural instrument in the 18th century, and that's how we kind of look at the novel today, because the novel really helps redefine the time and space where we live, the way we speak and talk, how we feel, what we do. And really quickly, I want to kind of look at the definition of a novel. And the term novel comes from the French word nouvelle or the Italian novella, which means new. And it is extended generally to fictional narrative in prose. And until the 18th century, the world referred specifically to short fictions of love and intrigue as opposed to romances, which were epic length works about love and adventure. So prior to where we are right now, all of these imaginative works about adventure and heroes and all of those types of things were really embodied in that phrase romance, which we know from reading Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, that romance was basically a word, not romance little r as in like love and all of that kind of thing, but romance as in looking at someone's journey through life. And that really changes in the 18th century when we come up with a new phrase of the novel. So during the 18th century, the novel adopted features of the old romances and becomes one of the major literary genres. And the novel, when you think about it, is relatively, it is probably the youngest form of imaginative writing, and because it's only about 250 years old, and it has this really embattled kind of start. Its rise to preeminence begins in the late 17th century and grows exponentially in production by the 18th century and becomes the primary form of popular entertainment. And we get the first kind of novels in the first 18th century, first half of the 18th century, with works like Aphra Behn's Oroonoko, or John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. But the rise of the novel coincides with the rise of the middle classes in Western Europe. There is a profound social and economic change that brings the novel into popular prominence, and those changes include advances in technology of printing, which makes written texts available to a growing population of readers, as well as changes in modes of distribution and literary rates, which brings books and pamphlets like Amata's Proposal pamphlets to populations excluded from education, like those working class men and women. And authors in this particular time period become free agents in the literary marketplace. And the point I am trying to make is that we see, like I said, I mean, the novel would not have come into production had it not been this growth in the middle class and this kind of expansion of literacy, and also this kind of looking at literature as a way of instruction and a way to reach the quote unquote undereducated. So the novel as a genre developed and was valued according to these themes or these features. And one of the most prominent features is this kind of focus on realism, or this, and realism is really synonymous with veracity or truth, and it focuses on the experience of the individual as subject matter, the exploration of individual consciousness and perception. And the reason that we get these kind of themes are because the 18th century is so focused on truth, objectivity, and this kind of self-betterment, but also with observation and being true to real life. And towards the end of the 18th century, when we get this kind of admiration for this new literary form, is this kind of push against the objective and more on the subjective experience of an individual. There's this kind of focus on social status and social order, because if you think about the rise of the middle class, there is this instability of social categories. There's this concern about external social order and how it's related to the internal or the moral state of its members. And the novel is really understood as this cultural instrument designed to confront those intellectual and social concerns. And there's also kind of a theme of this sense of reward and punishment for things that if we do something bad, we're punished. If we do something good, we're rewarded. I mean, if you look back at Samuel Johnson's Rambler #4 and his kind of definition of or the goal, what what he says the goal of the novelist is to do is to establish these kind of moral compasses and privilege virtue over vice, and this kind of idea of being punished for the things that we do bad or being rewarded for virtue is key to the novels at the time. For example, Samuel Richardson writes the epistolary novel Pamela, and the alternate title or the kind of under subtitle of that is Pamela or Virtue Rewarded. So there is this kind of emphasis on didacticism and showing society what it means to be virtuous, especially for women. And we'll talk about this in a second, because women were the most prominent of novel readers. So anyways, with this kind of new genre, there's also a level of controversy that comes with the growing form of the novel. And we see that, like I said earlier, with Samuel Johnson, because the novel becomes this form that is implicated in how society views the world, because it is vested in engaging people and manipulating how people think and feel, because it comes with that kind of education. Novels are used as this way of introducing people to the real world without having them it's a way of giving them experience and exposing them to various avenues of the world. And because there's this kind of rise in literacy, and I know I'm repeating myself, but the consumption of the novel, the point that I'm trying to make is that because there is such a vast readership, the novel becomes this way of control over the lower class, and also for women, because women were the most avid of novel readers. And at the heart of that controversy is this kind of idea that novels were written for and by women, and consequently, because of that, there are these kind of misogynistic views that reading then becomes this dangerous activity. Not necessarily reading, reading novels becomes this dangerous activity, mainly because, as we saw in Samuel Johnson, women couldn't necessarily tell the difference between reality and fiction. And they get this kind of unrealistic expectation about people. And Mary Astell kind of focuses on that too when she talks about how women need to be educated on how the world really works, and novels may or may not be the way to expose them to the kind of harsh realities of the world. Women could be corrupted by fiction in the sense that they get these views of men who are or men and women who are in these kind of precarious, promiscuous situations, especially as we'll see with the Gothic genre. And it's a way of kind of introducing them to vice in a way that is unfavorable, and in that it promotes this kind of loss of innocence. And there is also too that reading becomes too pleasurable, in that they become addicted to reading, and they won't do anything else. All they want to do is read novels. And Jane Austen really focuses on this controversy with Northanger Abbey. So I am going to pick up here in my next kind of video where I introduce you to my shero, Jane Austen. So stay tuned.